Are there any questions?
But both the speakers started by talking about faulty models and frameworks, and pointed out that it's really because the very basis of our understanding of progress or development is based is you know is clinging to these faulty models. Now, if that is so, then what are the practical suggestions that you can offer for us to move towards discarding these models?
By the 1980s, a lot of decision makers were beginning to understand that the system is not working and had begun to look for new solutions. And if you see many of the policy documents that come out in the 90s and in the present decade, it's amazing that the language, the jargon in these documents is all the jargon of the activists of the 60s, 70s and 80s. So, in principle, more and more people are beginning to accept this. The best example I can give you is of watershed development, one of the big programs of the government of India. Up until 1990, it had remained an elitist enterprise, given over to science and technology institutions and let them do it. But the scientists and technologists had very little success to show for all their work, whereas the efforts of people like Chandi Prasad Bhatt or your own Anna Hazare or Sukho Majri showed that if common people are involved in this enterprise of watershed development, it seems to yield results. So, in the 90s, a whole new program of watershed development was created, in which the focus was demystify this, technique and let it become participatory. The terms began to be used, participatory watershed development. Okay? So, at one level that is going on. The biggest obstruction that I find is not so much at the political level. It is easier to talk to politicians and get them to appreciate the need for change and how that change has to be introduced. The hardest thing is to get through the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy will stand up as a united wall and will not say yes. They will continue to obstruct, they'll continue to oppose you. And if with the help of the politicians you get your measures through, then their task becomes to obstruct you at every level.
I do agree. A majority of them are. So where do we begin actually? The problem is, as my colleague behind asked, that what are the practical steps where we can really influence the system? That is the key issue.
See, you have to realize that eventually the given structures were also set up by somebody at some point in time. Correct. So they are not the forces of nature. Okay, they can be changed, and sometimes it's a matter of finding the right point in the system to push. I've actually been quite surprised how fast this new idea of GDP has taken root. I mean, as I told you,
Changing the GDP.
Yeah, I mean, remember, this is two random bankers spending their weekends less than a decade ago, and now this is being talked about at the very highest levels around the world. You know, the European Union is seriously considering rethinking the whole way we calculate GDP and so on. So this is,
it's an idea that has arrived.
It has arrived. The Planning Commission is definitely interested. The Minister, Jairam Ramesh, has shown a great amount of interest in our work. As I've already told you, Supreme Court of India is already using our work. So I wouldn't say that it's not possible to change. Yeah, it would be great if it was faster and so on. But remember, also on our side, we have at every stage to refine ideas, to build on them. implementing our framework badly would also not lead to anything good.
No.
So we need to, this
Be
is
more rigorous yourself.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I've come up with a particular methodology. It's not God-given. So it too, at some point, hopefully will outgrow itself and be thrown away, and somebody else will come with a new one. But point is, it's continuously important to keep and in fact, it requires really a very tiny group of people to simply keep chipping away.
Now, the 21st century company that progresses will be one that finds a way to earn simultaneously, do well on the three bottom lines. Restore the environment, or at least preserve the environment, deliver social benefits, and also earn some financial profits. But as we see in large parts of the so-called Naxal belt and even other parts of the country, many private enterprises are in conflict. And they are not able to morph to that next level of doing everything simultaneously.
I'll tell you
what are the barriers?
The real barrier is the fact that we value many of these things the wrong way, and the frameworks we set up again. And I'll give you an example, a counter example. Let's go at a positive example. Everybody talks about the Maoists. Germany, about a decade ago, decided to begin to force people to move on to a new paradigm of growth. They began to insist upon houses to be refitted for being more efficient, and all kinds of other...
What, by regulation?
By
enforcement?
Enforcement, regulation, general encouragement, subsidies. It was a part of the debate, so people began to do it. Now what has happened, interestingly, that whole industry, sort of the next generation of industry, grew out of that. And in fact, a decade later now, Germany happens to be the only functioning economy of strength in Europe.
Yeah.
So it isn't the case that people gave up. The period of change is what is painful.
That was possible in Germany because for 25 years before that, the Greens had worked very hard.
Yes.
Okay, they had built the social base on which those became almost inevitable transitions.
Yes.
Now, in India, we can say that there was a kind of maturing of a modern environmental movement when the citizens' reports for the environment, were done. Ravi, you were part of that, in fact, that generation. You were part of the leadership that made those things possible. Since then, much water under the bridge. We are now really effectively 3 decades down the road from that moment. Do you feel that we have enough of an environmental, civil society energy to give the kind of push that would make the kind of, would validate Sanjeev's optimism?
I think we are getting there. The activists, the environmental activists in India are fighting fires, and they are able to put out the fires in many places. But they are able to also affect some policy making. I think the breakthrough that we need to make at some point is to convert this into a political platform. Right? That's one thing we need to do.
Consider, and the current debate which is happening in the country, the nation seems to believe that all ecological and environmental issues are anti-development. How do you sensitize the nation?
Well, I think there are 2 issues here. One is the fact that this is being debated at all is a good thing. So far, this would not have been a debate at all. So in that sense, progress has been made. There is a debate in cabinet, and there, even if it's only one minister, he's actually bringing it up and actually stalling these things. So at least there is some friction being applied to this system.
Before we wind up, I would like both of you to say what you visualize or what you would urge the under 25s of this country, who are now the bulk of Indians. What do you see as the kind of inspirational possibilities for them? How would you urge them to look at progress or be part of a process of truly redefining progress as well-being?
If I had to make some suggestions based on past experiences, I think one of the most exciting things that I got involved in was in the late 60s, just coming out of IIT and creating a program called the Student Volunteer Program, where my friends and I took hundreds of young students out of the IITs, out of the medical colleges, and gave them an opportunity to go and live and work in the poor sections of the country, whether in the rural areas or in the urban slums, gave them opportunities to do that. And even today, every now and then somebody walks up to me and says, you know, that was the turning point in my life. Okay? I think more and more, this, see, we are not aware. We do not know the other half. Huh?
The best thing they can do is take a year off and just travel around the country. There is nothing that can educate you better about what this country is about than actually traveling in Indian trains, by the way, and going to different parts of the country. Much of what I'm talking about is not rocket science in many ways. It is just that people have not gone and experienced, and in fact also go abroad, if those who can afford it. Because I think that is very key, that the more you see of the world, the more, firstly, you of course it does make you less certain of many things, but being less certain also begins to that you begin questioning the way things are.
Yeah, yeah. And you're saying that those multiple exposures will give that person many different encounters with well-being and
Yes.
not well-being.
Yes.
And that our collective wisdom will necessarily come from that.
Well, hopefully.